Is it just me, or do we feel like all the books that have come out these past couple months just haven't been the best? I feel like all the authors and all the publishing companies were just afraid of how hype society was about the newest Sally Rooney, that they haven't been giving us as good of books recently. Is that just me?
Right. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back.
Hey, hello. Welcome to my corner of the World Wide Web. My name is Fats. We're talking about Sally Rooney today, and I have been so excited to have this discussion. The only disclaimer that I need to give you is I am nobody. I truly am nobody. I've told so many people that the reason I don't like Sally Rooney is I probably just don't get it, and I probably lack the brain cells to get it. Everything I'm saying today is an opinion. And if you believe that women deserve rights, like the freedom of speech, then welcome to my channel. If you don't believe women deserve rights, like the freedom of speech, this video is not going to be for you. But for real, you guys, I am just a person experiencing the powers of a podcast mic, which means I need to start preparing for an apology video. I'm well on my way. I'm not apologizing about Sally Rooney, though. That's not what you're going to get from me. But no, it's a roast video. It is. I don't want it to be just like a dig at Sally Rooney, though. I have a lot of chaotic notes. I have a lot of things that I'm going to be flipping through here. And I kind of want to make this genuinely really interactive, hopefully a little bit informational, and I hope to spark some kind of conversation. Disclaimer done. Let's get into Sally Rooney. Now you know who I'm talking about. You know that Sally Rooney right now is at the center of so many discussions in the world. You know that tables and tables of Barnes & Noble are filled with her books. I'm sure your used bookstore has her. I'm sure your friends are reading her. I'm sure that when you go sit at a coffee shop, you're seeing people reading Sally Rooney. Sally Rooney goes further than just an author. She is at the center of conversation. She is leading critical theory right now, and she is also at the center of debate in politics and discussions of womanhood, grief, character, the novel, writing. She is leading a discussion right now. I don't agree with the discussion that she is having. Sally Rooney. But before we get into that, let's start with the woman herself. Sally Rooney, born February of 1991, a good old-fashioned Irish girl. Now, Sally really went to school in Dublin for a stint, and then also did a little bit of a stint in New York. Part of what she went to school for was she did start a degree in politics and political theory. She did not finish that, and she instead finished that master's in American literature, both classical and modern. Which I think is so important to know. She is an educated woman. Nothing I have to say, or nothing anybody could say about Sally Rooney, would rest in her knowledge as a human being. Sally Rooney is at the center of debate. She was a leading debater. She is a leading writer. She was at the center of discussion for political theory, politics, and government theory. She knows what she is talking about, and that is not something that I feel anybody can argue. She is a woman of knowledge. She is a woman that came from such renowned universities, and she writes her characters into those spaces, these spaces of education and of discussion and of growth and of intellect, and she posits herself there. I don't have anything against her knowledge. I do think she is a smart woman, and some of the clips that I have seen her talking, she carries herself with this air of knowing and of confidence, of understanding. This is a woman who reads the newspaper, both print and online copies. I know that. Now, she started writing in school. She did begin with a couple of short stories, but her actual novels came later. She did say that when it came to writing and when it came to producing these novels, it was difficult for her to get a grasp on what a novel was for her, what the writing process was for her, how much of herself to put in, how much of herself to see, and how much was to be seen outside of herself. And as she was going through that, she did look to a few inspirations along the way. These inspirations were Sheila Heti, Ben Lerner, James Henry, and Chris Kraus. And what really inspired her to be able to put out these novels and to be able to start these discussions and to eventually get published was critical theory. At the center of writing for her is a battle of what writing means to her, of what writing is to her, and of what writing means to society. And in that, she started discussing what it meant to create a character and what it meant to write characters. At the center of all of her books, at the center of everything she puts out, is relationship, is connection, is discussion, is growth. I want to say growth. I do want to stick with that word, I think, because there is growth in every discussion that you have. You do change with every time you speak to somebody and every time you relate to somebody. And Sally Rooney writes for that. Now, when discussing her writing, when her books started coming out, everybody had something to say. So many people were feeling so many different things. And not all of them were positive. While she does have this huge following, there is this aspect that people don't quite know how to take care. And the reading experience is almost flagellating to make it through. There is a sense of degradation to read her characters and to experience what you're experiencing. Some people have called Sally Rooney the Taylor Swift for millennials. Some people have called Sally Rooney the Salinger for the Snapchat generation. Other people who have interacted with her text and her prose have had said things like, the discussion cannot be about the quality of her sentences, which are impeccable, or about her tone, which is thoughtful, often sweet-minded and always rigorous. This is prose you either get or don't get. For some it is incisive, for others banal, which makes me wonder if it is so clean, it reflects the reader's prejudices right back at them. Or, a flat, affectless prose. Novelists operating in this disenchanted style presuppose, like Rooney, that an unshakable feeling of worldly alienation, together with an almost pathological degree of highly absorbed self-examination, constitutes the only fitting response to the conditions of millennial life, and to the dilemmas forced on their protagonists by late capitalism. The temperament described and always shared by these writers is one that veers unsettling between a familiar kind of cynicism about the social world and embarrassing displays of earnestness. Other authors highlight the benefits before they do go into these further critiques by saying her dialogues are filled with discourse or complaints on Marxism, classism, late capitalism, identity, and gender politics, even more likely to take place during a vacation in Southern Europe. Her novels continue to divide readers. Some find her social complications infuriating and her characters unreliable. I do think that what all of these criticisms are getting down to the bottom of, and something that I feel personally as well, is what Sally Rooney is saying is important, but how she is saying it is subjectively wrong and incorrect, poorly done, sloppily done, banal, trite, and inconsistent. I think the best book to start with is Conversations with Friends, written in 2017. This book goes into friendship, lust, jealousy, and miscommunication. Sally Rooney loves to write about miscommunication. She loves to write about what it means to be human and the flaws of not being able to communicate yourself from one person to another. Conversations with Friends is a story of Frances and Bobby. Both of them are friends. Frances is deep within her own life as a writer. Bobby is her best friend with benefits sometimes, and they used to date. It's a bit of a messy situation. They come into contact with Melissa. Now, Melissa's husband, Nick, and Frances go about an affair. But this affair and the nefariousness of it and the way that Frances thus interacts with Melissa and Bobby and those around her, her friendships crumble and they deteriorate almost as a consequence of lust with Nick. And that relationship with Nick goes further than just lust. It becomes wanting, insecurity. There's discussions of mental health. So much is done in this novel. But what I think is so important is this discussion of what it means to be an unreliable narrator. And I've had to bring it up to friends because what I struggle with and what I have struggled with Sally Rooney is, in a sense, is self-awareness unreliable? Is writing a character with this infallible sense of self-awareness an unreliable narrator?
All right. So you asked if a self-aware person could be reliable. I think so. I think a self-aware person could be reliable, but I don't think them being self-aware is what makes them reliable, because even a self-aware person can be hypocritical or do things that you consider outside of their character. So that's what I'm going with.
Because when you read the character of Frances, she is this affectless character who is twice removed from her debilitating pain, experiencing these huge emotions in what is such a detached and observant way that feels as if I have a scientist picking apart a situation rather than a human experiencing a situation. Frances goes through these motions as if she is mimicking what a human would feel, or mimicking what a woman would experience going through these feelings of endometriosis and going through suffering and going through pain. And it feels as if I have taken what a woman is, positioned her around a corner, shown a light behind her, and then Sally Rooney is writing from the shadow puppet wall explanation. It feels like I am telling stories the same way that cavemen used to, and then Sally Rooney is translating from that blurry, blackened explanation thereof, and then she is writing it intermixed with big themes. So often I felt as if these characters were a tool, as if these characters were not written as characters, but written as motifs. Sally Rooney had agendas. She desperately had agendas. And I do think her agenda and how she went about it and how focused she was on it was deleterious to her actual work. Don't worry, I have an example. Page 174. I got out of bed after I read that exchange and stripped my clothes off to look in the mirror. Periodically, I found myself doing this out of a kind of compulsion, though nothing about me ever seemed to change. My hip bones still jutted out unattractively on either side of my pelvis, and my abdomen was still hard and round to the touch. I looked like something that had dropped off of a spoon too quickly before it had time to set. My shoulders were freckled with broken violet-colored capillaries. For a while, I stood there just looking at myself and feeling repulsion get deeper and deeper, as if I was experimenting to see how much I could feel. Eventually, I heard a ringing noise in my bag and went to try and find it. I think at the baseline of this, if I smooth brain read Sally Rooney, I relate to that. I relate to looking in the mirror, not liking what I see, and picking apart every aspect of it. I relate. However, the way that these characters go about experiencing their emotions is I want to say scientific. I want to say it's almost body is telling me the weather. And what I'm getting at is being a human and being flawed in my humanity is the vagueness and the misunderstanding of emotions. Not understanding what I'm feeling and having to take time to learn that, and having to work and having to struggle, having to go to therapy and having to talk it out and having to journal these feelings that I feel. There is no immediate sense of understanding. And when you write about humanity and when you write about womanhood, when you write about the body and when you write about the experience with the female body, you cannot possibly write about it in a way where you understand it with the breadth that these characters do. And while it does sound convoluted, I think that to be writing about humanity, in order, when you include humans and connection and feeling, and you want to portray that, when you have this level of self-awareness, you are then given an unreliable narrator. Now, unreliable narrators, when done properly, are so good. The world is filled with them. From media, some of my favorite movies actually have this unreliable positioned at the center. And this unreliability can be an affect of so much. Funsies. It can be an affect of manipulation, misunderstanding, mental health, disability, hurt, pain, wanting, a desperation to be understood, a desperation to not be understood, a desperation to not want to understand yourself.
Welcome to Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
Unreliable narrators are sprinkled throughout media in some of the best ways possible. I would say that Deadpool himself is an unreliable narrator with how meta and how much he knows and how he is able to interact. Sally Rooney strips fallibility of these characters and leaves you with such a sterile human. She stripped away what makes humans and what makes a story told by a human so raw by adding this depth of self-awareness. I have another example. We have a character that's suffering with endometriosis, a very difficult thing to work through. As a Black woman, endometriosis is very heavily a part of the Black female society. So reading about a character that was going through this, having to deal with discussions of infertility, having to deal with discussions of not understanding pain and feeling pain and having to be okay and not knowing at what point you can put down the strongman act. I wanted to relate to this character, but when suffering is written like this, and when pain is written like this, page 263, I looked out the window at the station. I had the sense that something in my life had ended. My image of myself as a whole, or a normal person maybe. I realized my life would be full of mundane physical suffering, and that there was nothing special about it. Suffering wouldn't make me special, and pretending not to suffer wouldn't make me special. Talking about it, or even writing about it, would not transform the suffering into something useful. Nothing would. I thanked my mother for the lift to the station and got out of the car. there's no way to discuss dissatisfaction if we're not talking about normal people.
You try to act like we're friends, but you know you're not that kind of person.
I'm not acting. Maybe I am that kind of person.
Why are you talking to me then?
Normal People is a story of first love. It's a story of two Sligo natives who come together and come apart and come back together again, no matter how desperately they may or may not want to, if that makes sense. It is a cyclic tale of first love, and again of lust and wanting, and more miscommunication. In my opinion, this is a story of two flawed people trying to love each other and trauma bonding through that love and building connection around all of things that you shouldn't necessarily build connection around. It's a story of hurt people, hurting people, and all at the center of it, Sally Rooney also decides to interweave in discussions of class, privilege, identity, depression, mental health, substance abuse, friendship, desire, sex, and love. She also intermingles in different aspects of familial trauma, working through the family and understanding the family. Now, one thing that I do want to say is Sally Rooney understands the novel. In this space of her working through critical theory, she said that she sees the writing process as rough drafts into getting her thought fully out. She sees each of her works as a different version of herself and of the topics that she wants to talk about, and as rough drafts of one another. And you see that here with her slowly putting out these pieces that touch on the same topics, but touch on them in a way that you can tell she's growing as an author. She is growing into herself, growing into her voice, growing into her writing process, and growing into her storytelling process. But a lot of people do say that she is writing the same story over and over and over and over. And there's another side of things that she is discussing the topics that are important and making sure that we see them from different lights and see them from different understandings. I personally no thanks. Explain it to me all you want. I don't want that. I feel like Normal People, of all the books that I read, was my favorite. In my final feelings of this novel, it felt like I wrote it down. This novel felt like a negotiation of dynamics, of gender roles, of relationships, of wants, of needs, and a negotiation of what should be heard, what should not be heard, and what needed to be heard. There is a very coercive aspect of socially structured connections. There is no should, would, or could. These relationships deteriorate around the characters no matter what they try to do. The writing process for Normal People was different than the other books in that the characters of Normal People had lived within Rooney a little bit longer. She had written a short story earlier in her life where she wanted Connell and Marianne to have bumped into each other after leaving a protest. And then they had a bit of a discussion there and then parted ways. But she always felt like something was missing. And in this discussion of she is unable and she is not interested in writing characters outside of relationship and outside of connection, she felt like what was missing from those characters was a relationship between those two. They could not just bump into each other outside of a protest. They had to have bumped into each other previously. They had to have these connections. They had to have previous conversations. They had to have moments that they affected each other and brought them into the present, because just to have this spur of the moment bump wasn't enough. And she felt it was unrealistic to be able to touch on the topics that she wanted these characters to feel and experience if they didn't have a relationship.
It's such an interesting question for me, because I can't really conceive of character separately from dynamic. And that's both speaking as a novelist, in the sense that I never write about characters in isolation, and I can't think of a novel that is about a character in isolation. It would be a very experimental novel, very much a break with what we consider the novel to be doing. Generally, novels are about situating characters within social settings, and obviously within intimate relationships, personal relationships, and families as well. So that's sort of like, that's how I conceive of character. A character to me is someone who is engaged in one or more dynamics at a given time. And I can't actually imagine what it would be like to write about a character who was just on their own all the time.
I have, of course, marked a couple of moments in this book. One thing I did want to talk about is sex is very prevalent in all of Sally Rooney's books. So very prevalent. But in so many aspects of sex, it is a taboo, almost violent act that two characters are experiencing with each other. Violent, not so much physically in every sense. There are moments where it is violent. I am about to read a section that does kind of touch into that. But when I say violence, I mean unkindness. Unkindness is violence. Going into sex with somebody who wants a connection and not feeling that connection and not experiencing that connection and treating them like just the body is violence. Objectification, where somebody is not wanting to be objectified, is violence. Unseeing is violence. Not communicating is violence. Not providing and not interacting with somebody's pleasure is a sense of violence. There are so many levels to violence and uncaring, I would say also. And it feels like Sally Rooney writes sex for the heterosexual women who have not had good sex. I'm going to emphasize heterosexual because the gays know what they're doing. No, I feel like the way that I'm experiencing sex and the way that I'm seeing these sex scenes and the way that these characters are interacting with each other in what ought to be intimate, even when it is intimate, or even when it is violent, or even when it is uncaring, it feels like a woman has taken to Twitter after a poor situationship. And I, luckily, am blessed enough to have some good sex. And when I read these moments, and when I read moments when these characters were supposed to be having a good intimate moment, I was like, oh, gross. Oh, I wouldn't want that for me. But the scene that I want to read right now is our character Marianne, the one that's in this on again, off again with Connell since high school. She comes into a different relationship while she's traveling, and she has started dabbling into BDSM. And it's her way of feeling a sense of control, of feeling a sense of submission. Sally Rooney loves writing a submissive woman. These women here are pushed along by the story. The women that Sally Rooney writes, they are very passive. There's this passive inferiority that comes with each woman, this passive submissiveness that comes with each of these female characters. But very realistically, Marianne is experiencing that. In a metaphorical sense, I do understand being a woman is difficult, being out here is hard, people are pushing me along, I am just a cog in the machine. I get that. I'm not saying that isn't an important conversation to have. What I am saying, though, is in this one specifically, Marianne has started dabbling. in some BDSM. I'm going to get to how I feel about that in a second, but let's read this scene. Because a man that she is in this BDSM type of relationship with, he says he loves her. And she snaps and she's like, don't you say that to me. Unchain me. Right? She's like, take these ropes off of me. Get me out of here. Don't speak to me in that way. Right? I want to be very clear, she says. I feel nothing for you. Nothing, okay? He turns to his camera, back turned to her, as if to disguise some expression. Malicious laughter at her distress. She thinks. Rage? He could not, it's too appalling to consider, actually have hurt feelings. He starts to remove the device from the tripod. She opens the door of the apartment and makes her way down the staircase. Could he really do the gruesome things he does to her and believe at the same time that he's acting out of love? Is the world such an evil place that love should be indistinguishable from the basest and most abusive forms of violence? Outside, her breath rises in a fine mist and the snow keeps falling, like a ceaseless repetition of the same infinitesimally small mistake. Now, here are some things that I don't care to talk about. I don't care to talk about the extended metaphor of the snow falling and how that was just so perfect and pushing this motif. We already know, I feel like these characters are motifs for something else. We already know that this level of self-awareness is annoying to me. I was so frustrated with the lack of nuance that came with BDSM culture. To have these general statements of violence and sex, and somebody can't love you if they're violent, and there are these base actions. If you educate yourself on BDSM, it is a space of trust when done properly. You cannot be within a BDSM, a dom, sub-dom, coloring kink. You cannot be within kink without intense levels of communication and trust. And I felt like these moments of that self-awareness and these generalizations and the way that sex was discussed in this book and the way that Marianne was experiencing these violences was an odd way of not adding nuance to sex. There is so much nuance. This isn't me sliding you my resume. It's not. I was a Girl Scout, though. No, I think that to write this character who's like, I've experienced trauma, I'm going to have an unhealthy relationship with sex, I can't believe these guys are hitting me. Did Rooney write these male characters that were putting their hands on her within the bedroom as these trash characters? Yes. However, there is a way to write sex with nuance, to write sex and BDSM and all of these aspects in a way that doesn't make it seem like all-knowing Rooney is telling us that you can't have love that isn't kind. There is kindness in a little bit of spanking. That's my platform. That's what I stand on. I have one more scene that I want to read you. I did enjoy this one a bit more, this book. But as I move into the next book, I want to talk about overwriting. And there is an example here of overwriting that I'm going to read you. And then we're going to use that to kind of transition our way into the next book that I read. This is page 95. Hold on, I need to wet my chops. When they get to her apartment, now, she asks if he wants to come in. He says he needs to eat something, and she says there are breakfast things in the fridge. They go upstairs together. Connell starts looking in the fridge while she goes to take a shower. She strips all her clothes off, turns the water pressure up as high as it goes, and showers for nearly 20 minutes. Then she feels better. When she comes out, wrapped in a white bathrobe, her hair towel dried, Connell has eaten already. His plate is clean and he's checking his email. The room smells like coffee and frying. She goes toward him and he wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. And he's nervous suddenly. She stands at his chair and looking at her, he undoes the sash of her bathrobe. It's been nearly a year. He touches his lips to her skin and she feels holy, like a shrine. Come to bed then, she says. He goes with her. Afterward, she switches on the hairdryer and he gets in the shower. Then she lies down again, listening to the sound of the pipes. She's smiling. When Connell comes out, he lies beside her, then they face one another, and he touches her. She says. They have sex again, not speaking very much. After that, she feels peaceful and wants to sleep. He kisses her closed eyelids. It's not like this with other people, she says. Yeah, he says. I know. She senses there are things he isn't saying to her. She can't tell whether he's holding back a desire to pull away from her or a desire to make himself more vulnerable somehow. He kisses her neck. Her eyes are heavy. I think we'll be fine, he says. She doesn't know or can't remember what he's talking about. She falls asleep. I just read that just because I did enjoy this book a bit more. I just wanted to read another section to you. But I wanted to use that as this pivot point to discuss Beautiful World, Where Are You? The book about how Alice, a writer, comes into contact with Felix, and she and him travel to Rome in order to meet up with Eileen, Alice's friend, and Simon, Alice's situationship friendship thing. And this deludes itself into a friendship discussion as these people have a lot of sex and do a lot of talking and send a lot of emails. Now, this third person narration that comes from these emails, Alice and Eileen are constantly communicating with each other throughout this book, even when they're far apart. And the way that these emails are written spoon feeds so much to me. And it didn't hit until this book. The feeling that Sally Rooney gives me when reading is, it's like instant gratification reading. It is the TikTok of literature. The way that these short epithets are coming at originally, I felt as if Sally Rooney wanted to write essays, as if she wanted to write quick little Instagram posts and push them out with characters for some reason. The way this was written, these quick epithets of thought and these quick epithets of prose just weren't fitting together and flowing properly. And it wasn't until this one that I was like, is this the effect of a generation whose attention span and ability to sit and think and work through something, and this idea that words don't have to give you instant gratification, if any at all. I've read so many books that I love because I still haven't reached that point of gratification in a novel, and I still haven't reached that point of understanding and of awareness as a reader. But somehow this book spoon feeds in a way where every single paragraph you know what to feel and you can feel it immediately. I do have an example. I just tabbed one of their first email strains just so you can kind of feel what these emails feel like and see what I'm talking about. I also want to use this as a way of showing how discussions of politics show up in these books. Page 41. Alice, I think I've also experienced that sensation you had in the convenience shop. For me, it feels like looking down and seeing the first time I'm standing on a minuscule ledge at a dizzying vertical height. And the only thing supporting my weight is the misery and degradation of almost everyone else on earth. And I always end up thinking I don't even want to be up here. I don't need all these cheap clothes and imported food and plastic containers. I don't even think they improve my life. They just create waste and make me unhappy anyway. Not that I'm comparing my dissatisfaction to the misery of actually oppressed peoples. I just mean that the lifestyle they sustain for us is not even satisfying in my opinion. People think that socialism is sustained by force, the forcible expropriation of property. But I wish they would just admit that capitalism is also sustained by exactly the same force in the opposite direction. The forcible protection of existing property arrangements. I know you know this. I hate having the same debates over and over again with the wrong first principles. This is what I mean by what she is saying isn't incorrect. The way she is going about it is subjectively just a poorly written story. Guys, I'm losing my voice. I've been running my mouth. 333. Opening the door out wide, he leaned on the frame and looked out at the damp garden, breathing in the cool night air. For a while, neither of them said anything. Alice got up and took a dustpan and brush from under the sink to sweep up the glass. The very smallest shards had scattered the furthest, under the radiator, between the fridge and the countertop, glittering silver with reflected light. When she was finished sweeping up, she dumped the contents of the pan onto a sheet of newspaper, and then wrapped that up and put it into the dustbin. Felix was leaning on the door jamb, looking outside. "It's the same thing you think about me," he remarked. "Just interesting that it's the same." Inside, she straightened up and looked at him. "What?" she asked. He took a deep breath and exhaled before answering. "You think Eileen doesn't care as much as you do," he said. "And you think the same about me, that you care more. Maybe that's why you got to like me in the first place. I don't know. Part of me thinks you just hate yourself. Everything you're doing, moving out here on your own, with no car or anything, getting your feelings involved with some randomer you met online. It's like you're trying to make yourself miserable. And maybe you want someone to fuck you over and hurt you. At least that would make sense why you would pick me out, because you think I'm the kind of person who could do that, or would want to." She was standing at the sink saying nothing. Slowly he nodded his head. "Well, I'm not going to," he said. "If that's what you want, I'm sorry." I think that is a prime example of overwriting a scene. In this, it's so funny because in the world of telling and not showing, you've got Sally Rooney. And I would say that if I had to rank her first 3 books, it would go Normal People, Conversations with Friends, Beautiful World, Where Are You? I do think it primarily has to do with my experience as a reader. From the emails, from these topics, I can't get over how I'm so glad we have a literary fiction author who a lot of women are reading, who's discussing topics about my body, about the female body, that is so prevalent, bringing up politics in a way that is so important. Weaving it into stories is so great. I just wish she cared about her story as much as she did her lessons. The writing is not good. And I would like to say that the writing is not good purposely. She doesn't see the point of a quotation mark. She doesn't see the point in paragraphs ending. She wants it to feel like this immersive stream of consciousness. Your characters are flat. You are not using punctuation. You don't care about how you're writing these stories. And while we're talking about the absolute dissolution of how Rooney is writing, we can get to the final novel, Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I don't have it here. If you were here for my TBR video, you remember when I was holding up a print copy of it that I bought? Yeah. My local bookstore has a 30-day return policy. I made it to page 100. I was done. I have some thoughts. I have some words. Sally's newest novel, Intermezzo, is a story about two brothers who have just experienced the loss of their father. And it becomes this juxtaposition of an older brother who is this well-known lawyer who seems to have his entire life together, where in the space of grief, he also starts experiencing some misuse of medication and drugs, as well as a misuse of romantic partners, I would say, and an inability to properly connect in the way that he wants to, if he does even want to. And then you have the younger brother, who is a kind of starving competitive chess player who falls into a relationship with an older woman. There's a few things that I have to say about this book, and they're all centered around the male gaze. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to hold your hand when I say this. Take a strong, independent, feminist author who cares about women. Sprinkle in a little bit of man dislike. Then write about the male gaze. And you are going to supposit a very specific kind of male character there. Even when you're writing a character that I think the author liked a bit better, the way that she treated both brothers was very different. And you can tell she has a favorite of the two, even from the author POV that I just described. When writing a male character and his gaze, it's just funky. It felt very anti-man to exist with these characters. I don't know how to explain it. I hated it. I hated it. And her final book, like Normal People, my favorite of them. 280 pages. Her newest book is 470 pages long. At 100 pages in, after experiencing being within these men and experiencing these characters, this is Sally Rooney's first time writing men as more than just a tool to push her story along. In Beautiful World, Where Are You?, both Simon and Felix are nothing more than these pawns to help push along the narrative. They are used as narratory cogs. If anything, they're not characters, they're not people. They don't do much other than validate the story that Rooney wants to write and push forward the message that she really wants people to get. Intermezzo, the male characters are whose brains we are existing with it. And I just felt like it came from a place of dislike? Is that fair to say? Without getting canceled? I didn't like it. I don't know. I can't put my finger quite on it. But anyways, let's talk about the male gaze. Let's talk about how these men view women. Peter and Naomi. Naomi is a sex worker. Peter is involved with her. And the way that we speak of Naomi, there is a line that stood out to me like crazy. And of Naomi, it said that she was the owner of nothing in the world but her own perfect body. Meanwhile, when you were getting these sex scenes with Ivan and Margaret, they're awkward in a very organic kind of way. It was a very organic relationship, and I say that in the most base sense of that word. Not organic like fun, free living, but organic as in like cells and atoms coming together in a way that is without outside forces, without outside chemicals, almost. I don't know. Even their relationship just felt disingenuous. I hit a point with Intermezzo where I just didn't have anything left to say. Because it felt like the things, the rhetorical devices, and the moments of dislike in my experience as a reader only got greater as Sally Rooney discovers herself as a writer. She came into this last book with sentences that lacked articles, subject, object. Occasionally she wrote sentences that lacked verbs. She gave this disjointed feeling of thought and prose, and this idea of intimacy with your characters. She writes in a way where the discussion around quotation marks and the discussion around their use and disuse thereof rests in connection. In the removal of quotation marks, you can do a few things. You can remove the reliability. Again, because when you add a quote and when you quote something, that is a trusted, exact source. Think about when you're writing a literary paper and you quote something exactly versus when you just include it in your paragraph. There is a very real reliability to that. However, when you just have these stream of consciousness thoughts and this disjointed narration style, I feel like trusting these characters goes even further out of the window for me in how I understand this use of punctuation and of balancing out truth versus dishonesty. On the other end of the argument, you have the fact that taking away these quotes and existing so deeply within a character's mind deepens the intimacy and deepens your connection and full-blown deposits you within the story. You experience these thoughts and you feel these thoughts. At the end of the day, when it comes to using quotation marks and not using quotation marks, I think it comes down to people are just vibing. And I think that as a reader, we're reading into it too much. Sally Rooney sat in an interview and said, I just don't understand why we need to use them. She didn't say anything about we're getting deeper, we're getting more connections. These are reviews, these are critics looking deeper into it. Sometimes a red door is just a red door. And Rooney just said, I don't know why we need them. I don't know why the novel needs them. I don't see their importance. That's it. And then she decided to break down her paragraphs more, and it felt almost like a screenplay. It felt like she was writing out a play, because these large blocks of text with no paragraph breaking, these sentences that felt like stage directions, while also saying it was stream of consciousness, it hit a point where this aspect of form and content, form mirroring content, form of prose, and these things playing off of each other in a way that was supposed to be cohesive, for me did not work. For me, it hit a point of laziness, and it felt like there was no editor, rather than feeling like I was experiencing an aspect of critical theory and a new form of the novel and playing with the novel. It instead felt like I had an author who didn't care about their audience. And then that becomes a whole other discussion. Who do you write for? Who do you create art for? Who do you have these discussions for? Because we can't just say that Sally Rooney is writing for herself, and it is not for me to experience. It is not something for me to want to feel. However, I wanted to. Goodness gracious. I DNF'd it. I don't have any quotes to read. I don't have anything to say about this one. I didn't make it. I gave up on Rooney. Will I read another Rooney? Yes, I would. I would read more Sally Rooney. I am never going to spend my money on Rooney ever again, though. Not without first getting it from the library or getting an audiobook. I need to test drive a Rooney before I ever think about buying one. I did enjoy this one for the discussionary aspect of it. I liked normal people so that I can hate on normal people. I didn't enjoy normal people. Sometimes a book is so important for your growth as a person because you hate everything that's going on with it. Does that make sense? Are you seeing what I'm saying? I have a quote on my chest. This quote is actually from The Color Purple, one of my most read books. It says sinners have souls too, for anybody who's ever been curious. That book infuriates me. I have never read a book in my life that makes me feel me and my ancestors. It makes me and my ancestors feel so much anger. Just thinking about it makes me so mad. But sometimes you read a book to feel something other than pleasure. That was Normal People for me. I purchased that one. I returned to Intermezzo. Now, to close out this video, goodness gracious, my voice is shot, you guys. I've been talking for so long. My coffee is ice cold. Let me give you some book recommendations. I'm just going to recommend you books based off of some of the feelings I had, some of the things I experienced. And the point of me recommending these books is not to give you another Sally Rooney. It's to try to give you a book very different than Sally Rooney that touches on the same things that Sally Rooney does. Now, first up, flawed people loving each other. I would like to recommend you Alone with You in the Ether by Olivie Blake. It's two people who meet in the Arts Institute, supposedly by chance, and he's a doctoral student that manages his destructive, compulsive thoughts with math. And she's an artist undergoing psychotherapy whose destructive thoughts are art. And it's these two people that are so opposite just coming together. And goodness gracious, Olivie Blake knows how to turn a phrase. This book is vibes, no plot. But for me, it hits a level of humanity that I personally really enjoyed. It is flowery, but that is Olivie Blake. Olivie is going to add some flowers and some spice and some whipped cream on top for you to experience, but I enjoyed that one. I would like to recommend you that first. When discussing grief, I want to recommend Arrives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This book discusses a woman, a partnership, where one of them has come back from an exploration of the bottom of the ocean. A exploration of the ocean that went awry, and she's not talking about it. But when she comes back, she does come back different. And the partner who now has that partner back, who has been waiting all this time for our partner to come back, feels this relationship slipping from her, feels it reforming, feels it is different than it was before, is feeling a different aspect of love, and is grieving somebody that is right there in front of them. I love the theme of grief, of somebody present. I think that is such a painful thing to try to write. I think that is something, I don't know, hard. Anybody with like an ailing partner, anybody with somebody who is experiencing any type of disability that may take them from you a little sooner than you want them to. Anybody with an older dog, a dog who can't get up the stairs anymore. Grieving somebody still there. Grieving the change in love. Grieving somebody who maybe has come back to you with a different sense of trauma, and they've changed, and learning to love a completely new person, and grieving the loss of the love that you used to have. I love that aspect of grief with somebody staring right in your face, and I feel like this book does it. If you want to play around with the form of a novel and the psychology behind a novel and the psychology of thought, read Sheila Heti, Motherhood, or Pure Color. Pure Color is a very frustrating read. Read that one if you like experimental literature. Read Motherhood if you like experimental literature and you're actually going to get something out of the book. It delves into this idea of the female body, of what comes of it, what is expected of it, and the expectations of the womb, essentially, which is an intense discussion to have, especially me. I'm walking around and this womb is not getting used. But what does it mean to be a woman and to not give into those expectations, and to give into it? Sheila Heti does play around with those thoughts. That's all I have for you. Goodness gracious. I feel like I've been sitting here for forever. I don't have any way to close this out. Thank you for hanging out. If you like Sally Rooney, this isn't anything against you. I think you're so cool. And I maybe just don't get it.